We're talking about hydrangeas today. A lot of times gardeners get to this time of year and are not sure how should I prune my hydrangeas. So let's take a look at some of the dried flower heads. You can see right from this one, which is a little lime dried flower head, the inflorescence, that's what the flower head is actually called, and it's made up of many florets, typically 4-petaled florets. And when you look at this one, you can tell it's a paniculata because it has a slightly cone shape. Here in Manitoba, southern Manitoba, we basically are growing paniculatas and macrophyllas and arborescens. The most common arborescens is the Annabelle. Paniculatas and arborescens are the easiest hydrangeas to prune. So as I said, this is little lime, a paniculata, and you can see the slightly cone shape. Now this is also a paniculata. This is quickfire hydrangea. It's it is also cone shaped, but much more open and lacy bloom and far fewer florets. Now here, blowing around the garden, I picked up a macrophylla, and that is the mophead hydrangea. So certainly they're not gorgeous at this time of year, but many people don't keep their plant tags, and understanding the shape of your hydrangea, recognizing the distinct shape, really helps you to identify your hydrangea which species you are growing, if you didn't happen to keep your plant tag. So let's start with the macrophylla, the Endless Summer series, which is the globular shaped hydrangea. And I have it here. It's not fully zone 3B hardy, so you can see that I've really mulched all of them with a layer of shredded leaves, and that's about all that I do. The one thing about the macrophylla hydrangea is I don't prune it. I don't prune it in the fall, and I don't prune it in the spring. And the reason for that is that it blooms on both new growth and old growth. So it's actually forming the next year's flower buds when you get into fall. So when it begins producing blooms in July, as the blooms begin to fade, you can certainly prune them off, prune them right below, just above the next set of buds. But otherwise, if you prune them in the fall, or if you prune your macrophylla in the summer hydrangea, and this is twist and show in the series of Endless Summer, if you prune it in the fall, then you've basically effectively pruned off next year's buds, and you won't get blooms on that stem. Don't despair though, because it also blooms on new wood, and so when you get into June, end of June, July, you see all the beautiful fresh new growth coming up, and it's just a matter of weeks and your shrub grows to full size. I also wait until mid-June because even though the stalk looks dead as a doornail, as the temperatures warm, you begin to see if there is some new life, and it's very exciting to see. And we'll walk over here and we'll take a look. This is little lime hydrangea. It retained most of its dried flower heads over the winter. You can see again the panicle shape. All I do is a light cleaning. I take a look to see whether or not there are any branches crossing over, or whether or not there are broken branches. And I don't rush into it. I always feel there's plenty of time to prune your hydrangea, but I will prune it directly beneath the flower head just before the next set of flower buds, and it's as simple as that. The other thing I do, especially with a hydrangea that was planted, a new hydrangea, one that was planted last year, the rabbits really seem to know which are the new hydrangeas. They love the bark, and so they will really strip it. So I take a look to see whether or not there's any bark. This is an older little lime hydrangea, so I really take a look to see whether or not any of the bark is stripped, and usually at the base. And then if that's the case, I will cut that off. as I go through the spring, I'll clean it up a little bit. So, you know, if I don't quite like its shape, I'll maybe clean out some of the older branches. The other thing about your hydrangea is if you're really not happy with its shape, and providing that it's mature 3 to 5 years, for the first 3 to 5 years, you really only want to be trimming it lightly. But once it is a mature shrub, if you find that it's all of a sudden producing fewer blooms, or if it is producing smaller blooms, you can rejuvenate your paniculata or your arborescens, which would be incredible, Annabelle, very, very easily with a hard pruning when you get into the fall. You can rejuvenate it by cutting it down 8 inches, as much as 8 inches above the ground. I'm usually 10 to 12 inches if I want to rejuvenate it. And then what happens is it just takes right off, and you will get larger blooms and more plentiful blooms, providing you're giving it your best cultural practices, which is adequate water and the correct exposure.